Hello, everyone, and welcome to the session for right now, which is sex positive mechanics and games. I'm the moderator, Robert Yang, and joining me is a really great panel of a bunch of really great designers working with sex positive mechanics and games. And you'll hear from all of them very shortly. Briefly, this panel is just about conversations around sex and sexuality because we think they shouldn't really be shied away from. We want to bring these topics into games and also discuss the design and safety considerations around sex positive mechanics in games. And also, we want to think about an enjoyable experience. How do we design something that isn't offensive and isn't embarrassing, or at least is embarrassing in a good way, not maybe in a bad way. First off, let me just talk a little bit about me, why I was asked to moderate this panel. Yushin. This is one of the games I've made. Hurt Me Plenty. It's a BDSM kind of kink primer where you just spank this guy, and then you also negotiate how he'd like to be spanked, and you also do some aftercare afterwards. Um, and it's an okay game, I think. But I think it's emblematic of this big wave of a bunch of people making a bunch of awesome games about sex and intimacy and eroticism. Um, but we're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about everyone else here. First up, talking about Nothing to See Here is Mary Georgescu and Yushin Go. Mary Georgescu is a narrative game designer and founder of High Duke. She is currently working with Eat Melon Studio to launch a card game and has two zine tabletop RPGs that have been fully funded and are being fulfilled on Kickstarter. And Yushin Gao is a game developer, designer, and curator based in NYC. Her work explores interactive media for social change with a focus on social issues in China and the US. In addition to her love of digging into emerging technologies, she actively crafts new interfaces to make these experiences accessible to a wider audience. Take it away, Mary and Yushin.
Hey,
Hello.
Mary, do you want to give an overall for what our game is?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Nothing to See Here is a card game for 4 to 6 players where you are trying to explain yourself out of a compromising situation that you find yourself in. You play 4 simple rounds where you're picking up cards and sort of adding these cards to your narrative. You start with a profession, a state in which you are found, and a location in which you are found. And then, uh, as the game progresses, you also obtain these items that you are found with that complicate your story or might complicate someone else's story. So yeah, that is the gist of Nothing to See Here.
Yeah, when we're designing Nothing to See Here, we incorporated a lot of sex toys in the items you're using. So, so the players are getting caught in this compromising situation with sex toys on them, and they have to explain what the sex toy can be used other than sex in order to cover up their story and to be able to get out of the situation instead of being appointed or being appointed as scapegoat in the end of the game. And the stories usually involve this kind of explanations of player have to say the handcuff is not a handcuff, it's bracelet happens to be connected. And in this ways, we're able to have players who is not usually very comfortable with sex topics get into the game and ask people questions what this is for. I've never seen fluffy handcuffs, and how do people really use it? um, those type of conversations is how we sort of tackle sex and sexuality in the game. and being able to bring players who's not normally would look for this type of games, or who is a little shy about talking about it. For example, when I start designing a game, I wasn't completely ready to talk about it with like my friends, but I can get into the game and play very comfortably with them. So that's sort of the charm of Nothing to See Here. Cool. Yeah, I think that's Nothing to See Here.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for sharing. Let's move on to the next one. Next project and designers Honey and Hot Wax by Lushan Khan. Lushan Khan is best known for designing Visigoths versus Molgoths, which was Emmy nominated for Best Writing in 2020, and also designed Dead Friend, a game of necromancy, which was IGDN nominated for Most Innovative in 2019. And he is also the co-editor of Honey and Hot Wax, an anthology of erotic art games. Take it away, Lushan.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. So, Honey and Hot Wax is an anthology of 8 tabletop and live action role playing games on the theme of sexuality from a diverse group of 9 designers. And I'm actually the co editor. So, I did this project together with Sharang Biswas. And it was published by Pelgrane Press, and the whole thing was funded by the Effing Foundation for Sex Positivity. And we really had the goal in this project to make sure that we had a bunch of really different games from a diverse group of designers to make sure that we got lots of different perspectives. So we have a lot of diversity in gender and sexual orientation, in ethnicity and culture, and all of those things represented in the group. And some of the games are just on the topic of sex, while others use sex acts as game mechanics. You can go ahead and change the slide. Thank you. So we wanted to include this wide range, right, where some of the games are just on the theme of sexuality or discuss sexuality in some way, all the way up to games where you're actually performing sex acts as part of the narrative or as part of the gameplay mechanics and systems, so that people who are engaging with this text have a wide range of options depending on their comfort level and also how intimate they want to get with the particular other players that they happen to be playing the games with. So I'm going to quickly talk about mechanics in a couple of the games. Let's talk for a second about Pass the Sugar Please. This is a game by Cleo Yunsu Davis. And this is a game where you're not actually performing anything even remotely like sex acts as part of the mechanics. Instead, it's a game where you're together with a bunch of people at a tea party, and the premise is that you're all part of a secret BDSM sex club. And you all were there the night before and you hooked up with other people at the club, but none of you knew that everyone was there because you were all wearing masks. So you're trying to communicate something to your sex partner from the night before, only using innuendos about the tea and the sandwiches and the desserts. So this is a really fun game, and it's especially great for people who are interested in exploring the topic of sexuality but don't actually want to start having sex during the game. Right? It's a different kind of way of engaging the material. But then, right, moving into intimate, we have something like Follow My Lead, which is a game where everybody is blindfolded. It's like you play it in person. People are doing different BDSM acts with each other. So you're actually starting to engage in things that are more sexual with the other players. Moving on to my own game in the collection, in the Clefts of the Rock, this one is much more intimate. You're actually touching each other's bodies, all the way up to touching each other's genitals. And the way it works is that you're playing a landscape. So instead of playing characters, you're playing locations. You're playing a weird otherworldly planet. And you are touching each other's bodies and these parts of the planet while describing the landscapes and the history of the locations. So this is a surrealist game. And again, it becomes sexually intimate, right? You're actually physically touching other players while using a very different narrative context to give bodies different meanings. And then finally, we have some games where you're just having sex, right? You're actually fully having sex as part of the narrative or part of the mechanics of the game. Games like Feeding Lucy by Janaea Kemper and The Echo of the Unsaid by Charing Biswas. Both of these games, right? One of them, Feeding Lucy, you're playing Dracula and Lucy from the Dracula story, and you're having this erotic encounter. And the other one, Charing's game, you're playing straight frat boys who are having gay sex together and all of the things this means to them. So we have a huge range of things going on in this book. And we have here today two of the designers from the book. So Kat Jones and Will Morningstar are here to talk a little bit about their game in the book.
Oh my God, how convenient to have two of the designers from the book here with us today. Yeah, talking about You Inside Us is Kat Jones and Will Morningstar. Kat Jones, she, they, is a queer Latina game designer and scholar. Kat is the co-author of 2 games in Honey and Hot Wax and an anthology of erotic games, which are The Sleepover with Julia B. Ellingbo, as well as You Inside Us with Will Morningstar. And Will Morningstar, pronoun Z they, is a trans designer of games and rituals. Their work includes A Gentle Spirit, a solo game about an interaction with a strange and friendly creature, and The Blood Sings, a game for 2 about monster hunters stalking each other. As well as You Inside Us with Kat Jones, a game about sex with an alien parasite. Their particular fascinations include fear, tenderness, monstrosity, healing, and the fragile borders of the self. Take it away, Kat and Will.
Hey, it's good to be here. Where do we start with this game?
So You Inside Us is a game about having sex as an alien parasite. It's a game for 2 people. So one of you plays the human and one of you plays the alien symbiote.
Right, it's simultaneously about having sex with a weird alien that has never experienced a human body and having sex with a human from inside their body. Yeah, and this is a game that aims to sort of broaden the notion of what might constitute sex and sort of explore what kinds of things are sexual, are enjoyable, through just sort of decontextualizing things and having to explore from first principles.
And it's a game that can be played face to face with 2 people in the same room. But we also have a sort of a remote digital rules that we included. So it is a game that can be played with 2 people that are not sharing the same physical space.
If you're in person, the entire game is played while you're in physical contact and you're simulating all sorts of different sensory experiences through touching the human player's skin. And remotely, it's played with one person on camera with a focus on what kinds of things they're feeling in their body. Yeah, and we sort of alternate between scenes where you're being observed, you're not able to react fully in the way you want to, and you're discovering what it is like to exist in this strange shared body. And then the other kinds of scenes.
Yeah, so the game is very much about getting to know these 2 characters, getting to know each other, getting to know what they enjoy, making some sort of connection together, and sort of leaves open you need to be fairly comfortable with the other person that you're playing with, right? This is not a game that you sort of want to get somebody off the street that you've never played with before. But in terms of sort of the intimacy of the touch, it's left up to the two players to sort of negotiate what they are comfortable with.
Yes, we give some guidelines on sort of how to facilitate that conversation. But I mean, really, it's all about being able to have that conversation, being able to trust your partner, yeah, and learning new things about yourself. I think that's us.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for sharing, Will and Kat. Should go to the next slide. So that's introductions for all of us. So by now you should be maybe acquainted with how all these panelists and presenters just have so much experience designing for sex, thinking about sex. So that's why we have this beautiful panel. We're convening it together to tackle some interesting questions together, and let's see what happens. I get to be the lucky moderator here, though, who gets to ask some of these questions. So, first off, let's just talk about sex positivity for a little while, right? Because the name of the panel is, sex positive mechanics in games, right? So, I guess ideally, maybe every panelist could maybe talk a little bit about how do you define sex positive for your work or games or design practice, and why should people care about it? Who wants to go first?
I can start off first. For Nothing to See Here, we started the game with one backstory, which is about a monogamous couple, and one of them getting caught in a situation cheating with others, and their partner walked into the house and then trying to figure out what had happened. During the design of the game, we expanded the backstory and incorporated elderlies in elderly home who is sort of dating other people as well, and single parents who is not in a like monogamous relationship, and like grandparents found their grandchildren is actually exploring and in this like sex party after the sex party. So all these different scenarios is us um, trying to be more open-minded and also just be considerate. This is monogamous relationship is actually not the only type of relationship, and there's so much more like the various like preferences people have and commitments in their relationship. Um, Besides that, we also designed the game using gender neutral names. So just from the names of the characters you're using, you can never tell whether their pronouns. So you would have to ask like what they identify themselves as, what pronoun they identify themselves as. Those are the things that immediately come to my mind of sex positivity and how the game is tackling it. How about you, Maren?
Yeah, I would add to that to say I think the unspoken thing that we didn't know how to tackle was that we were actually talking about cuckolding in the original Cheaters, which we did not have much experience or understanding of what that was, but it was very interesting because everyone just understood what was going on. So it was a huge learning process of like what is our game even saying, and then like why is it funny to people, and like why is it okay and appropriate in this lens. And that's why. That's because we were implicitly talking about that without actually like talking about it. So we spent the incubator trying to figure out how we ended up sort of like with these implicit storylines, and how we could now, using look at the mechanics, like what were the actual areas that we could improve upon and expand into. So now we just literally do accept and embrace the fact that our original story is, it could be that you're upset that this is like a cheating story, or it could actually have been cuckolding, like a lot of people had assumed to begin with. But we were a little late to to the party, so to speak, on what was going on there. Um, and yeah, now we've just expanded it so much more to include a variety of different kinds of relationships, like Yushin had mentioned. And I'm excited. We've even expanded the list of kinks. We also spoke to Kit from the effing foundation, and they were super amazing and just helped us understand a lot of things that we didn't know. Like, we didn't know what pervertibles were before the summer. Um, so now we have like a really nice flavor of like some items that are super normal that end up being really dirty, like plushies and stuff. Um, and to the extremes of like, I guess, something that you would consider a sex toy. So it's just so much research. It was so much research that had to go into it, to the point that like our normal conversations were just indirectly somehow sexual on a daily basis because we were so used to talking about it. And it was fun. It was like such a fun, enjoyable game to work on.
Lucian, Kat, or Will, do you have any thoughts on sex positivity and how it relates to your practice?
Yeah, I was gonna say, and I think I can speak for Sharing as well when I say this, my co-editor, that we think a lot, or we did think a lot as we were curating this anthology about trying to find ways of making sex and sexuality uh, a point of imaginative activity, right? A way of recontextualizing these things that we do with our bodies into being some kind of imaginative and creative act. So that's really sort of at the heart of the Honey and Hot Wax anthology, right? It's like this question of, can sex mean other things besides the usual things that they mean in our society and culture, right? The meanings that they already have aren't going to just disappear, right? So they're still going to be connected to all sorts of people's ideas of love and desire and attractiveness and shame and a whole variety of other things, right? But can we, through games, add additional meanings and additional contexts for these physical actions that we do, right? Can sex also tell stories about alien planets and alien parasites and vampires and Victorian romance, and can sex tell stories about being part of a secret society and then going to a tea party, right? So we want to explore what other things sex can mean and be about, and that's sort of, I think, the heart of our sex positivity, right? It's not just it is, yes, right, sex can be really fun and interesting and should be pleasurable and consensual and all of these things, right? But also, um can we do other additional creative things with sex that might not be so obvious?
I really love that that description. The idea of like bringing creativity and imagination to the process of of sex and play, and I think for me a lot of what it is like flipping that on its head, right? The not just can sex mean other things, but can we make other things into sex? Uh, right? Can touching a piece of ice on your own be sex? Can eating soup be sex? Can running a blender be sex? Uh, and I think, yeah, I mean, the approach to sex positivity that I was trying to keep in mind for you inside us was like trying to just sort of think just very broadly about what could be considered sex, and just to be like, well, what do you want? What feels good for you? Um, and then that's good. That's fine. That's sex. Please have fun.
I just want to
Yes. Oh,
go ahead.
go ahead.
I was just going to add, I feel like there are additional dimensions to sort of what could be sexually interesting, right? There's, the obvious, like what is physically arousing, right? But there are also dimensions like what is aesthetically compelling, right? What is intellectually engaging, right? So I think that is also sort of at the core of the sex positivity of the book, right? It's like, you know, even like whether or not you are actually physically aroused, right, when you're playing these games, kind of doesn't matter that much, because that's not so much the focus, right? You might be physically aroused while playing these games, but what we want players to focus on is, well, what are the other dimensions as well, right? What's happening aesthetically, what's happening intellectually, what's happening emotionally, like what are these different levels on which you can engage with some kind of sexual content.
Yeah, so I in my other job that's not game design, I am a sociologist, and my research focus is sexuality. So I'm very used to thinking about all the different meanings that sex has, and different discourses about sex that exist, and how people talk about sex and how people don't talk about sex. Um, and so it always really made sense to me when I started designing games that sex would be a topic that games would address. And so I think for me, like a lot of the other people have said, this idea of like opening up that space to have that dialogue, to play with sex in this way that lets people look at it differently or explore it in a way. I think games offer us an outlet that we can access topics that might be uncomfortable to just sort of talk about. Um, and games and play help us think about things in new ways. And so I know when Will and I were sitting down to design You Inside Us, one of the things that we sort of played around with was how consensual is this encounter between this alien and this human. And we decided, sort of in the interest of sex positivity, we wanted this to be a really consensual, like connective, joyful coming together of these two very different beings. And that was sort of part of what we wanted to do with this game, was explore this kind of like awkward and intimate, but ultimately sort of connective and uh, generative kind of coming together.
I think that's a really great point. Not just about your work, but everyone's work here, right? Like all these games are kind of about fostering these conversations about sex, talking about sex. And I think it's one thing that struck me across all your presentations was that all of you were kind of also talking about audiences and approachability and, yeah, trying to make sex, not like a terrible, scary thing or not like an oppressive thing we need to be ashamed of, right? So, for instance, in like, Nothing to See Here is very much about, these like innocent items or like pivoting to innocence or something like this in like a funny, creative way, right? And Lucian, I believe in For Honey and Hot Wax, you were talking about how there's like a wide range of different approaches to tackling these topics, right? And then I think for You Inside Us, Will and Kat, both of you were talking a little bit about how your game also offers like guidelines for having conversations and negotiating between the players and partners. So I was wondering, for any designers in the audience, because maybe there's some game designers here at PixelPop. Do you have any advice for some designers or developers or design tips or something for how you might ease in your audience or how you might onboard your players or how you might design for approachability with respect to sex? Anyone?
I can say one thing. Something that a lot of the games in the Honey and Hot Wax collection do, and that I tried to do when I designed games around sex, is have if the game is eventually going to become very intimate, to have that gradually approach, right? So you don't dive immediately into right now we're all naked and having sex. Instead, there's sort of a period of acclimation, or a series of workshops, or something to sort of get the players from, like, we're in our usual world in which we don't always have sex while pretending to be other people or whatever, right? And we have to get from, well, maybe you do, but that you have to get from the world where that's not necessarily something you do every day, to feeling comfortable and ready to be doing this activity. So building in warm up rounds, gradual. In my game, in the Cleft of the Rock, you start out fully clothed, and all of the touching is you're touching people's shoulders, right? So you're like touching people's shoulders and describing the landscapes. And then in the next round, you're in your underwear, and you're touching people's mouths, and right, and then it gradually escalates to being naked and touching genitals. So I think that it does two things. One is it gets players sort of in the mentality to be able to engage in these more intense activities, but it also gives players a series of outs, right? A series of exit points, right? And it's also really useful to build those in, right? To build in mechanisms that make it easier for players to say, you know what, I don't actually feel prepared to do this. Can I exit the game at this point and go get a drink of water in another room, right? So building in those mechanics that make it easy, and make it not embarrassing, right? Make it as unembarrassing as possible, to be able to just nope out of there and go do something else.
Cool. Yeah, foreplay is important. Foreplay design, very important. Anyone else have any thoughts on like advice or tips for approachable audiences and onboarding players?
I mean, I would say that humor helps. If you're very focused on the humor and like you're like not punching downward on topics, because a huge part of what our challenge was is that Nothing to See Here it feels like it wants to be a party game, but it's not for many reasons. And I think one of the biggest reasons is like it doesn't have the same kind of humor. Like we're not talking about sex or genitals or like making butt jokes like in the same way that a lot of party games are so used to that sort of content because it's like easy to punch down um, on sex topics. So having humor and um, having like in our case like items that are familiar and stuff, we go through like an intro phase of everyone like knowing what everyone's situation is, but it's not weird yet. And then the second round that you get into it, then it's just like full on like the stories get like super complicated to hold on to. But at first it's pretty easy to explain yourself out of. So I think the same way that Lucian was talking about, like you uh build up is important. Yeah.
Anyone else have thoughts or design tips? Oh, Kat, go take it away.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that Will and I encountered as we were designing You Inside Us was how to facilitate these conversations around sexuality, around boundaries, the boundaries that the players are bringing to the game, and really thinking about how to make these conversations obvious, and how to make them sort of more comfortable for people to have. And it's one of the cool things about games is because they sort of structure interactions. You can structure the interaction in a way that like makes it easier for two people that might have had lots of other intimate contact with each other to talk about boundaries in a way that they may not have talked about them before. And really making those things sort of obvious, and doing things to facilitate them and make them easier. I think, Lucian sort of talked about mechanics, and sort of what can you do as a designer to make this interaction, to make this experience both easier, and also more obvious, I think is an important one.
Yeah, I think the one thing I want to add is basically just that your game is probably going to be, approaching things from from a particular perspective and having a particular lens on like how you're approaching sex. And I mean, I think the advice I would give there is figure out what that is and then make it obvious, be loud, set your tone so that people know what they're getting into, and so that people can find your game if that's a thing that maybe appeals to them.
Yeah, that's a great note. I do want to do a quick time check though. Mary, how are we doing? Should we do one more question or?
Yeah, let's do one more question, and then wrap up. Yeah, that sounds good.
All right. Okay, my last question, maybe a little bit cliched for a panel or whatever, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. I don't care. Uh, what do you envision as kind of like the future of sex positivity, or like the future of sex positive games, or even just like sex games in general? Like, are there some domains or topics that you feel like aren't being explored yet and you wish were explored more? Or are there some like methodologies we need to start adopting in sex game design? What should we be doing for the future? Anyone have any hot takes on that?
I think we're definitely, the longer we're stuck in our houses, we're gonna need like special games for video sex. I think video sex obviously has been around a long time, but I don't know if you've ever been on any of the sex apps. I'm on Scruff. It certainly lacks some of the imaginative activity that we might wish. So I think maybe we could do a good service to all of the folks stuck in our apartments, cruising Grinder, Scruff, or whatever, and make interesting games for video sex.
While designing the story for the caretaker and elderly house, I realized that we might be not serving the elderly community as well as other age groups. That's a potential, yeah, place that we can design more games and fun activities for them.
I'm just gonna say I love that idea. I love, because there are so many people who get into relationships in elderly communities and those shared community homes and things like that. Very, very common. So this could actually be very interesting, I think, for folks who are elderly and living in community housing and have new people that they're dating or seeing or whatever. This could be a very interesting area.
Anyone else have thoughts? Mary, Kat, Will?
Um, I would totally again echo what Lucian said about video. We at some point in the summer had actually seriously considered trying to get the game into a digital format for obvious reasons because we were playtesting it that way. But then we also just found out like we were having a lot of fun. We spent quite a while being on various apps, just seeing how we can mess with the filters and how the filters changed our experience. And I think, just out of curiosity, I would love to see a sex game that explores the use of filters a bit more. Like, that sounds like it could be really super fun.
Okay, so mine might be slightly controversial, which is I would really like to see games that deal with the topic of sexuality in a way that could be accessible for teenagers. Um, I think that there is, and I think for good reason, this understanding that if you have sex in a game and in sort of any form, it must be adults only. And I really think that having an outlet for teenagers to negotiate and sort of talk about sexuality would be a really useful thing. And having these kinds of games that address it in an age appropriate manner would be really good. So that is something that I would really like to see, is some games for teenagers that allow sexuality to sort of be thematized and discussed.
I guess I'm also just looking forward to seeing lots of different games from different designers, different perspectives, different experiences, stuff I would never have thought of as sex. And also just, I'm really excited to see what people do with like the developing field of teledildonics. And integrating that into games, I think, is a really exciting thing we can work on. So, you know, we'll see how that goes.
That's making me want to see a teledildonics hack of Mousetrap. So if anybody wants to collaborate on some kind of like Rube Goldberg machine game involving teledildonics, this has just appeared in my mind as a very intriguing prospect.
It's amazing.
Yeah, we should talk. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thanks everyone so much for this panel. I really loved all your responses. I feel like all your responses were kind of on this theme about like new audience, new demographics, people that we don't like often like associate with like playing together necessarily or in conversation together, right? Like, you know, how often do teenagers talk to the elderly? I mean, not maybe I'm like showing my bias, showing my own problems here. But, you know, I feel like that's kind of what the promise, I think, of sex positivity games can bring, right? It's bringing new audiences and demographics in conversation, in dialogue with each other. So I think it's kind of exciting. Anyway, thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. If for anyone watching us right now, you feel free to check out our Twitters and emails and stuff on that screen right there. If you haven't gotten a chance already, please follow all of us and check out the exciting sex positive work coming out from all these wonderful artists. And thank you to all our panelists for your time and energy and boundless creativity. Thank you so much. I guess, do we just wave goodbye at everyone now? Is that what we should do? That's the Zoom thing, right?
I think so.
Thanks so much for having me on this panel. Bye.
Oh, bye, everyone.
Bye,
Bye.
thank you.